I never thought I would end up in a situation where my livelihood depended on fighting a middle-aged woman who had somehow convinced herself that she controlled the entire neighborhood. But there I was, staring down the barrel of financial ruin, because Karen Mitchell decided my grain trucks were an eyesore. My name is Jake Kendrick, and I run a farming operation just outside Lincoln, Nebraska. My family has been working this land for 3 generations, and we have always prided ourselves on being good neighbors. We grow corn and soybeans on about 800 acres, and during harvest season, we have grain trucks coming and going several times a day. It is the nature of the business, and everyone in rural Nebraska understands that. Or at least, they used to. The trouble started about 6 months after Karen moved into the new subdivision that had sprouted up right next to my property line. The development was called Meadowbrook Estates, which was ironic because there was no meadow and no brook anywhere near it. It was just another cookie-cutter neighborhood of identical houses with identical lawns, governed by an HOA with rules thicker than a phone book. I had nothing against the place itself. My property was grandfathered in, meaning I had been there long before the subdivision existed, and legally, they could not tell me what to do on my own land. Karen apparently did not get that memo. She was the president of the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, a position she seemed to treat like being the mayor of a small country. She was in her late 40s, with short blonde hair that she kept in that classic speak-to-the-manager style, and she wore yoga pants and oversized sunglasses like they were a uniform. I first met her when she knocked on my door one Saturday morning in early September, clipboard in hand and a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Hello there," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I am Karen Mitchell, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association." "You must be Jake." "That is right," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. I had been working on my tractor all morning and was not exactly prepared for visitors. "What can I do for you?" "Well, I wanted to introduce myself and also discuss a little situation we have been noticing." She glanced down at her clipboard. "Your grain trucks have been using Oakwood Drive to access your property, and several of our residents have expressed concern about the noise and traffic." I blinked at her. Oakwood Drive was a public road that ran along the edge of my property. I had been using it to access my fields for over 15 years, long before a single house in Meadowbrook Estates had been built. "That is a county road," I said carefully. "I have every right to use it." "Oh, I understand that," Karen said, though her tone suggested she did not understand or care. "But we were hoping you might consider using an alternate route during peak hours. Perhaps the old farm road on the east side of your property." "That road does not connect to the grain elevator," I explained. "My trucks need to take Oakwood to get to Highway 77. There is no other practical route." Karen's smile tightened. "I see. Well, we will just have to see what we can work out." "I am sure we can find a solution that works for everyone." She left after that, but I had a sinking feeling that this was not the end of it. I was right. 2 weeks later, during the peak of harvest season, I woke up at 5 in the morning to a phone call from my truck driver, Marcus. He had been working for me for 7 years and was one of the most reliable guys I knew. He never called this early unless something was seriously wrong. "Boss, we got a problem," Marcus said. "There is a car parked right in the middle of Oakwood Drive, blocking the whole road. I cannot get the truck through." I threw on my clothes and drove out to see what was happening. Sure enough, there was a silver Honda Accord parked perpendicular across Oakwood Drive, completely blocking both lanes. And standing next to it, arms crossed and looking very pleased with herself, was Karen Mitchell. "What the hell are you doing?" I called out as I got out of my pickup. "Good morning, Jake," Karen said brightly. "I am conducting a traffic safety survey. This road has become quite dangerous with all your heavy trucks, and I am documenting the issue for the county." "You cannot just park in the middle of the road," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "You are blocking traffic." "I am parked legally," she insisted. "And I have every right to be here. This is a public road, as you said." "Parked legally," I repeated. "You are blocking the entire road. My truck needs to get through." Marcus was standing by his grain truck, which was loaded with corn that needed to be delivered to the elevator by 6:30. If he missed that window, we would have to wait until the afternoon, which would throw off our entire schedule. "I will move when I am finished with my survey," Karen said. "And when will that be?" she shrugged. "Could be 10 minutes, could be an hour, hard to say." I stared at her, realizing with growing frustration that she was doing this on purpose. She wanted to disrupt my operation, to make things difficult enough that I would give up and find another route, even though no other practical route existed. "Karen, I am asking you nicely. Please move your car. And I am telling you nicely that I will move it when I am ready." I pulled out my phone and called the Lancaster County Sheriff's Department. If she wanted to play games, I would let the authorities handle it. A deputy arrived about 20 minutes later, a middle-aged guy named Officer Dawson, who I had met a few times at community events. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, surveying the scene. I explained the situation, and Karen immediately launched into her own version of events, talking about dangerous truck traffic and concerned residents and her right to use public roads. Officer Dawson listened patiently, then turned to Karen. "Madam, you cannot park your vehicle in a way that blocks traffic. I am going to have to ask you to move it." "I am conducting a survey," Karen protested. "You can conduct your survey from the side of the road," Officer Dawson said. "Right now, you are obstructing traffic, and I can cite you for that if you do not move." Karen's face flushed red, but she got in her car and moved it to the shoulder. Marcus was finally able to get his truck through, now 45 minutes behind schedule. I thanked Officer Dawson and went back to the farm, hoping that would be the end of it. It was not. The next day, Karen was back, parked in the same spot at the same time. I called the sheriff's department again, and again a deputy came out and made her move. This became a pattern. Every single morning during harvest season, Karen would park her car on Oakwood Drive right when my grain trucks needed to pass. And every single morning I would have to call the sheriff to get her to move. After the 5th incident, Officer Dawson pulled me aside. "Listen, Jake, I know this is frustrating, but my hands are kind of tied here. Technically, she is not breaking any laws until she refuses to move, and once we show up, she moves. It is a gray area." "She is doing this to harass me," I said. "It is obvious." "I agree with you," Officer Dawson said. "But unless she actually obstructs traffic for a significant period of time, or explicitly refuses to move when ordered by law enforcement, it is hard to make a case stick. My suggestion: document everything. Keep a log of every time she does this, how long she blocks the road, and what it costs you in terms of lost time and money. If this keeps up, you might want to talk to a lawyer about getting a restraining order or filing a civil suit." I took his advice and started keeping detailed records. Each morning that Karen blocked the road, I noted the time, how long she stayed, and what impact it had on my operations. I also started taking photos and videos. My lawyer, a guy named Tom Richardson, who I had known since high school, told me that I had a decent case for harassment, but that it would take time to build. Meanwhile, harvest season was in full swing, and every day that Karen delayed my trucks was costing me money. The grain elevator had strict delivery windows, and if we missed them, we would have to wait hours for the next opening. That meant paying my drivers for time they spent sitting around, and it meant falling behind on harvesting, which could lead to crop losses if the weather turned bad. The other farmers in the area heard about what was happening and were sympathetic, but there was not much they could do. A few of them offered to talk to Karen, but I doubted it would help. She had made up her mind that I was the enemy, and nothing was going to change that. The situation escalated in late September. I had a particularly large load of corn that needed to be delivered, and Marcus was running the truck out at 5 in the morning to beat the rush at the elevator. Sure enough, Karen was there, parked across Oakwood Drive with her hazard lights on. But this time, when Officer Dawson showed up and told her to move, she refused. "I am not moving," Karen said, her arms crossed. "I have a right to be here, and I am not going anywhere until someone does something about these dangerous trucks." Officer Dawson sighed. "Madam, I have explained this to you multiple times. You are obstructing traffic. If you do not move your vehicle right now, I will have to place you under arrest." "Go ahead," Karen said. "Arrest me." I am sure the local news would love to hear about how the county is protecting corporate farmers instead of concerned citizens. Officer Dawson looked at me, then back at Karen. "Madam, this is your final warning. Move your vehicle or you will be arrested." "I am not moving." Officer Dawson pulled out his handcuffs. "Karen Mitchell, you are under arrest for obstruction of traffic. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." Karen's eyes went wide. I do not think she had actually expected him to follow through. "You cannot be serious." "I am very serious. Turn around, please." For a moment, I thought Karen might try to get back in her car and drive off, but she seemed to realize that would only make things worse. She turned around and Officer Dawson cuffed her and led her to his patrol car. Another deputy arrived to tow her Honda, and Marcus was finally able to get the grain truck through. I thought that might be the end of it. Surely after being arrested, Karen would realize she had gone too far and back off. But I underestimated her stubbornness. Karen posted bail that same day and was back on Oakwood Drive the next morning. This time, she was not alone. She had brought 3 other members of the HOA board with her, and they all parked their cars in a line across the road. When the sheriff's deputies showed up, all 4 of them refused to move and all 4 of them were arrested. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly, I was in the middle of a media circus. Reporters showed up at my farm, asking for interviews. The headlines ranged from sympathetic to sensational. Some outlets portrayed me as a hard-working farmer being harassed by an overzealous HOA. Others framed it as a clash between rural and suburban values, with Karen positioned as a concerned citizen standing up to big agriculture. I tried to stay out of the media as much as possible. I gave one interview to the Lincoln Journal-Star, where I explained my side of the story and emphasized that I was just trying to do my job. I also pointed out that my farm had been there long before Meadowbrook Estates, and that I had every legal right to use Oakwood Drive. Karen, on the other hand, seemed to relish the attention. She gave interviews to anyone who would listen, painting herself as a crusader for neighborhood safety. She claimed that my grain trucks were creating dangerous conditions for children and families, even though Oakwood Drive was not a through street for the subdivision and saw very little residential traffic. The truth was that Karen had never cared about safety. She cared about control. She wanted the entire area around Meadowbrook Estates to conform to her vision of a perfect suburban community, and my farm did not fit that vision. The legal consequences for Karen started piling up. After her second arrest, the county prosecutor decided to take the case seriously. Karen was charged with multiple counts of obstructing traffic, along with disorderly conduct and resisting arrest from the second incident. Her bail was set higher, and she was warned that if she continued her behavior, she would face jail time. But the real blow came from her employer. Karen was a fourth-grade teacher at a public elementary school in Lincoln, and the school district had a strict policy about employees being arrested. After her second arrest, she was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. The investigation concluded that her behavior reflected poorly on the district and violated the code of conduct that all teachers were expected to follow. In mid-October, Karen was terminated from her teaching position. I heard about it through the grapevine before it hit the news. One of my neighbors, whose daughter went to the same school where Karen taught, mentioned it to me at the feed store. I felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, I had not wanted Karen to lose her job. Despite everything she had put me through, I knew how hard it was to make a living, and I did not take pleasure in someone else's misfortune. On the other hand, her actions had been deliberate and harmful, and there were consequences for that kind of behavior. Karen did not see it that way. After losing her job, she doubled down. She filed a lawsuit against me, claiming that my farming operation was a nuisance and seeking an injunction to limit my use of Oakwood Drive. She also sued the school district for wrongful termination and the sheriff's department for false arrest. None of her lawsuits went anywhere. The judge dismissed her suit against me almost immediately, noting that my farm was clearly established before the subdivision, and that I had every right to use public roads for agricultural purposes. Her suit against the school district was also dismissed, as the district had followed proper procedure and had clear grounds for termination. The suit against the sheriff's department lingered a bit longer, but it was eventually thrown out as well. Meanwhile, Karen's criminal case moved forward. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had been engaging in peaceful protest and that her First Amendment rights were being violated, but the prosecutor pointed out that blocking a public road was not protected speech. In November, Karen pleaded no contest to one count of obstruction and was sentenced to 6 months of probation, a $1,000 fine, and 100 hours of community service. She was also ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from Oakwood Drive and my property. The restraining order was a relief. For the first time in months, I was able to run my farming operation without interference. Harvest season wrapped up without any further incidents, and I was able to deliver all my grain on schedule. The financial damage had already been done, though. Between the delays, the legal fees, and the stress, I estimated that Karen's harassment had cost me close to $30,000. I considered filing a civil suit to recover those costs, but Tom advised against it. "You could probably win," he said, "but Karen does not have any money. She lost her job, and she is facing her own legal bills. Even if you get a judgment, collecting on it would be nearly impossible. Sometimes it is better to just move on." He was right, of course. I had more important things to focus on, like preparing for the next planting season and making sure my farm stayed profitable. But it was hard to let go of the anger and frustration. Karen had tried to destroy my livelihood because she did not like the fact that a working farm existed next to her subdivision. She had used her position in the HOA to wage a personal vendetta, and even though she had ultimately failed, the damage she caused was real. The story might have ended there, but Karen was not done causing trouble. In December, she violated the restraining order. I was out checking my fields one morning when I saw her standing on Oakwood Drive, holding a sign that read, "Stop Dangerous Farm Trucks." She was not blocking the road this time, but she was clearly within the 500-foot boundary that she was supposed to stay away from. I called the sheriff's department immediately. Officer Dawson arrived within 15 minutes, and Karen was arrested for violating the restraining order. This time, there was no bail. The judge had warned her that any further violations would result in jail time, and he made good on that promise. Karen was sentenced to 30 days in the Lancaster County Jail. I did not attend her sentencing hearing, but Tom did, and he filled me in on the details. Apparently, Karen had represented herself, and she had used the hearing as an opportunity to give a long, rambling speech about how the justice system was rigged against ordinary citizens, and how I was part of some kind of corporate conspiracy. The judge listened patiently, then told her that she had brought all of this on herself, and that she needed to accept responsibility for her actions. After Karen was released from jail, she left Nebraska. I heard from a neighbor that she had moved to Colorado to stay with her sister. The HOA at Meadowbrook Estates elected a new president, a guy named Richard who was much more reasonable. He reached out to me and apologized for everything that had happened, and we even worked together to organize a community event where some of the subdivision residents toured my farm. It was a small step, but it helped bridge the gap between the farming community and the suburban neighborhood. As for me, I focused on rebuilding. The next planting season went smoothly, and I had a good harvest that helped offset some of the losses from the previous year. I also invested in some new equipment and hired an additional part-time worker to help with the workload. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after everything that had happened. Looking back on the whole ordeal, I learned a few important lessons. The first was that not everyone is going to understand or respect what you do for a living, and sometimes those people will go out of their way to make your life difficult. The second was that standing up for yourself is important, even when it is hard and expensive and stressful. If I had backed down and tried to find an alternate route, Karen would have just found something else to complain about. By holding my ground and documenting everything, I was able to protect my rights and my livelihood. The third lesson was that communities are stronger when people try to understand each other, instead of immediately jumping to conflict. The divide between rural and suburban areas is real, and it is easy for misunderstandings to escalate into full-blown feuds. But it does not have to be that way. When Richard and I worked together to organize that farm tour, it opened a lot of eyes. People from Meadowbrook Estates got to see what farming actually involves, and they gained a new appreciation for the work that goes into producing the food they eat. Some of them even became regular customers at the farmers' market where I sell sweet corn and pumpkins in the fall. I also learned that HOAs can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, they provide structure and help maintain property values. On the other hand, they can give small-minded people a platform to abuse their power. Karen was not a bad person at her core, I do not think. She was just someone who got a little bit of authority and let it go to her head. She convinced herself that she was fighting for a righteous cause, when in reality she was just being a bully. The legal system worked the way it was supposed to, even if it took longer than I would have liked. The police took my complaint seriously. The prosecutors held Karen accountable, and the judges enforced the law fairly. It was not perfect, and it was not cheap, but justice was served in the end. One unexpected silver lining came from all the media attention. Several other farmers in the area reached out to me after seeing the news coverage, and we started a local agricultural advocacy group. The goal was to educate the public about farming practices and to provide support for farmers dealing with similar conflicts. We also worked with county officials to develop better policies for managing the interface between agricultural land and residential development. It was not glamorous work, but it was important, and it felt good to turn a negative experience into something positive. I also reconnected with some old friends who I had lost touch with over the years. When the story first broke, people from my high school and college days started reaching out on social media to offer their support. We ended up having a small reunion at a bar in Lincoln, and it was good to catch up and remember that there were a lot of people in my corner. My relationship with Meadowbrook Estates improved significantly after Karen left. Richard, the new HOA president, turned out to be a really decent guy. He was a retired engineer who had moved to Nebraska to be closer to his grandkids, and he had a pragmatic approach to problem solving. We met for coffee a few times, and he explained that most of the residents had no idea what Karen was doing until it hit the news. They were embarrassed by the whole situation and wanted to make amends. Richard and I worked out a simple agreement. I would try to schedule my grain truck deliveries to avoid the early morning and late afternoon hours when people were commuting to and from work, and the HOA would stop treating my farm like it was some kind of blight on the neighborhood. It was a compromise that both sides could live with, and it should have been the solution from the very beginning if Karen had been willing to have an honest conversation instead of waging a personal war. The spring planting season came around, and for the first time in a year I felt like I could breathe. There were no cars blocking the road, no police calls, no lawyers, and no media trucks parked in my driveway. It was just me, my crew, and the land. We planted corn and soybeans like we always had, and the work was hard but satisfying. I did think about Karen from time to time. I wondered if she had found a new teaching job in Colorado, or if she had learned anything from the experience. Part of me hoped she had, but another part of me doubted it. People like Karen rarely change unless they are forced to, and even then, they often just find new targets for their frustration. In May, I got a letter from Karen's lawyer. It was not a lawsuit, thankfully, just a formal request for me to drop any potential civil claims I might have against her. The letter included a written apology from Karen, though it was clearly drafted by the lawyer and did not sound particularly sincere. She acknowledged that her actions had been inappropriate and that she should have handled the situation differently. She also stated that she was working on rebuilding her life and hoped to put the whole ordeal behind her. I showed the letter to Tom, and he said it was up to me how to respond. I thought about it for a few days, and ultimately I decided to let it go. I drafted a short response stating that I had no intention of pursuing further legal action as long as Karen honored the restraining order and stayed away from my property. It was not about forgiveness, exactly. It was more about closing a chapter and moving on with my life. Summer arrived, and the crops grew tall and green under the Nebraska sun. I hired a couple of high school kids to help with odd jobs around the farm, and it was nice to see young people taking an interest in agriculture. One of them, a kid named Danny, told me that his class had talked about the whole situation with Karen as part of a lesson on conflict resolution. His teacher had used it as an example of how not to handle a disagreement. I did not know whether to be flattered or embarrassed, but I took it as a sign that maybe some good had come out of the mess. The farm tour that Richard and I organized took place in June, and it was a bigger success than I expected. About 50 people from Meadowbrook Estates showed up, along with a few reporters who were doing follow-up stories. I walked everyone through the fields, explained the planting and harvesting process, and answered questions about everything from crop rotation to the economics of farming. A lot of people were genuinely curious, and several of them told me afterward that they had never realized how much work went into producing food. One woman, a retired nurse named Patricia, came up to me at the end of the tour and shook my hand. "I want to apologize," she said. "I was one of the people who signed Karen's petition to restrict your truck traffic. I did not understand what you were dealing with, and I am sorry for that." "I appreciate that," I said. "I do not hold it against you. Karen was very convincing and she made it sound like I was the bad guy." "She did," Patricia agreed. "But after seeing your operation and hearing your side of the story, it is clear that she was out of line. I am glad things worked out for you. Conversations like that one made the whole ordeal feel a little more worthwhile. It reminded me that most people are reasonable when they have all the facts, and that communication is almost always better than conflict." As harvest season approached again, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. The restraining order was still in place, and I had heard through the grapevine that Karen was still living in Colorado. There were no signs that she planned to return to Nebraska anytime soon, which was a relief. I hired Marcus back for the grain truck runs, and we went over the schedule to make sure everything would go smoothly. The first day of harvest came, and I woke up early with a familiar sense of anticipation. This was the moment when all the hard work of the past year paid off, when we would see whether the seeds we planted had turned into a profitable crop. Marcus showed up right on time, and we loaded the first truck with corn. As he drove off down Oakwood Drive, I held my breath for a moment, half expecting to see a silver Honda blocking the road, but the road was clear. Marcus made it to the grain elevator on time, and the rest of the day went off without a hitch. It was a small victory, but it felt huge after everything we had been through. The harvest went smoothly over the next few weeks. The weather cooperated, the equipment held up, and we brought in a good yield. I even managed to turn a decent profit, which helped offset the losses from the previous year. It felt like things were finally getting back to normal, or at least to a new normal that I could live with. In September, I received a call from a journalist who was writing a book about conflicts between rural and suburban communities in America. She wanted to interview me as part of her research, and I agreed. We met at a coffee shop in Lincoln, and she asked me to walk her through the entire saga with Karen. I told her everything, from the first morning Karen showed up at my door to her arrest and eventual departure from the state. What do you think was really driving Karen's behavior? The journalist asked. Do you think it was really about safety, or was there something else going on? I thought about it for a moment. I think Karen felt like she was losing control, I said. She moved to this new subdivision expecting it to be perfect, and then she realized that there was a working farm right next door. It did not fit her vision of what the neighborhood should be, and she could not stand that. So she tried to force me out, using the HOA as her weapon. Do you think the conflict could have been avoided? Absolutely, I said. If Karen had come to me with a genuine concern and been willing to compromise, we could have worked something out. But she was not interested in compromise. She wanted total control, and that was never going to happen. The journalist thanked me for my time, and I never heard from her again. I do not know if the book ever got published, but I hope it did. I think there are a lot of people out there dealing with similar conflicts, and maybe reading about my experience would help them navigate their own situations. As the year came to a close, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. It had been one of the most challenging periods of my life, but it had also been a time of growth. I had learned to stand up for myself, to navigate the legal system, and to build bridges with people who might not initially understand my way of life. I had also learned that resilience is not just about surviving hard times, but about finding ways to thrive in spite of them. The new year brought new challenges, as it always does on a farm. There were equipment repairs to make, budgets to plan, and seeds to order. But I faced those challenges with a renewed sense of confidence. I had been tested, and I had come out the other side stronger. I did hear one last piece of news about Karen in February. A mutual acquaintance mentioned that she had found a job working as a tutor in Colorado, helping kids with their homework after school. It was not the same as being a full-time teacher, but it was something. I hoped that she had learned from her mistakes, and that she was treating her new community with more respect than she had shown mine. As for me, I kept farming. I kept using Oakwood Drive to transport my grain, and I kept building relationships with the people in Meadowbrook Estates. Richard and I even became friends, and he would occasionally stop by the farm to chat or to buy fresh produce. It was a small reminder that even the worst conflicts can lead to unexpected connections if people are willing to put in the effort. The scars from that year did not disappear entirely. I still felt a twinge of anxiety every time I saw a car parked on Oakwood Drive, and I still kept detailed records of my truck schedules, just in case I ever needed to defend myself again. But those were small prices to pay for the peace of mind that came with knowing I had protected my farm and my livelihood. One warm afternoon in late spring, I was out in the fields checking on the young corn plants when I saw a car pull up to the edge of my property. My first instinct was to tense up, but then I saw that it was Richard. He got out of his car and waved, and I walked over to meet him. "Hey, Jake," he said. "I just wanted to let you know that the HOA is planning a community barbecue next month, and we would love it if you could come. We are trying to bring everyone together, and it would mean a lot to have you there." "I would be happy to," I said. "Thanks for the invitation." "Great," Richard said. "And I also wanted to tell you that I have been talking to some of the other board members, and we are working on updating our bylaws to make sure nothing like what happened with Karen ever happens again. We are adding clearer guidelines about what the HOA can and cannot regulate, and we are emphasizing the importance of communication and compromise." "That sounds like a good plan," I said. "I appreciate you taking the time to do that." "It is the least we can do," Richard said. "What happened to you was wrong, and we do not want anyone else to go through that. We are all neighbors here, and we should be looking out for each other, not fighting." I shook his hand, and he drove off. As I watched him go, I felt a sense of closure that I had not realized I was missing. The battle with Karen had been long and exhausting, but it had ultimately led to positive changes in the community. The people of Meadowbrook Estates were more aware of the challenges that farmers face, and they were more willing to work together to find solutions. The community barbecue was a big success. I brought some of my sweet corn to grill, and people from the subdivision brought all kinds of dishes. There was music, games for the kids, and a lot of friendly conversation. Several people came up to me and thanked me for being patient and for not giving up on the community. It was a far cry from the hostility I had faced a year earlier, and it felt good to be welcomed instead of vilified. As the sun set that evening, I stood with a plate of food in my hand and looked out over the subdivision. It was still not the kind of place I would ever want to live, with its manicured lawns and strict rules, but I had come to appreciate the people who lived there. They were just trying to build a good life for themselves and their families, the same as I was. The conflict with Karen had been painful, but it had also taught me that understanding and cooperation are always possible if people are willing to make the effort. I never saw Karen again. I heard occasional updates through the grapevine, but she remained in Colorado and never returned to Nebraska. Her name occasionally came up in conversations about the HOA or about conflicts between rural and suburban communities, but over time, those conversations became less frequent. Life moved on, as it always does. My farm continued to thrive. I expanded my operation slightly, adding a few more acres and diversifying my crops to include some specialty grains that were in high demand. I also started a small side business selling farm fresh eggs and vegetables at the local farmers market, which turned out to be surprisingly profitable. The work was hard, but it was rewarding, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that I was carrying on my family's legacy. The relationship between my farm and Meadowbrook Estates settled into a comfortable rhythm. We were not best friends, but we were good neighbors. The HOA stopped trying to control what I did on my own land, and I made an effort to be considerate of the people living nearby. It was a simple arrangement, but it worked. Years later, when I look back on that tumultuous time, I see it as a defining moment in my life. It tested my resolve, my patience, and my belief in the justice system. It forced me to confront the reality that not everyone would understand or support what I do, and that sometimes you have to fight for what is right even when it is hard. But it also showed me that most people are fundamentally decent, and that conflicts can be resolved when both sides are willing to communicate and compromise. Karen's decision to block my grain trucks was a selfish act driven by a desire for control, and it cost her dearly. She lost her job, her reputation, and her place in the community. But in a strange way, her actions also led to positive changes. They forced a conversation about the relationship between rural and suburban areas, and they brought people together in unexpected ways. I do not thank her for what she did, but I can acknowledge that something good came out of it. As I write this, sitting on my porch and looking out over the fields that my grandfather first planted, I feel a deep sense of gratitude. I am grateful for the land, for the work, and for the community that has supported me. I am grateful for the lessons I learned, even the hard ones. And I am grateful that I had the strength to stand up for myself and my livelihood, even when it seemed like the whole world was against me. The story of Karen blocking my grain trucks and ultimately losing her teaching job is a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting power go to your head. It is also a reminder that every action has consequences, and that the choices we make can have far-reaching effects on our lives and the lives of others. Karen made her choices, and she paid the price. I made mine, and I came out stronger on the other side. In the end, the farm survived, the community healed, and life went on. That is all any of us can really ask for. The sun rises, the crops grow, and the work continues. And somewhere out there, I hope Karen found a measure of peace and learned to treat others with the respect and understanding they deserve.